So actually, I want to start off with a question. So we all talk to a lot of people today. So I want you to think about, how many people on average do you think that people here talk to during lunch? All right, so we're gonna raise our hands here. So how many people thought that on average people spoke to less than 5 people? Less than 5. All right, a decent number. Okay, between 5 and 10. All right, 10 to 20. Who thinks more than 20? More than 20 is the average. A few people. All right, so we got a really nice spread there. We got some people saying more than 20. We got a bunch of people also saying just only a couple. But I think that's interesting because there's actually objectively just one right answer. Okay? And this is one of the reasons why it's a really bad idea to ask people how many people you talk to, because we're terrible at it. Humans are just terrible at it. We're not recording devices. We're organisms that interact with each other, that collaborate, that communicate, and we're good at that. We're not good at recording things. And it's interesting because if you think about the way that companies have been managed, really since their inception, fundamentally it's been about perception. And when I've tried to collect data on how you work, typically the way I do it is I ask you. I say, well, what do you like doing? How much did you actually talk to the sales team? It's a problem because it's inaccurate. And so you see companies that are starting to try to use data on how we actually behave, how we actually work to build organizations. And it's interesting because right now the leading industry, it's not tech, it's not maybe the usual players like Google or Facebook. Actually, it's a very old kind of organization. Actually, it's baseball teams. And I don't know how familiar everyone here is with baseball. Basically, it's a game that it's a lot more fun to watch if you're drunk. And you get paid a lot to hit a little ball with a bat, right? And it's nice. Again, with alcohol, it's very fun. But it's interesting because the way that you built a baseball team for 150 years is you used to get a lot of old guys who knew a lot about baseball, watch people play baseball, and then based on their subjective evaluations, they would build a team. And sometimes they were right and sometimes they were wrong. That was just viewed as the best way to do things. It was amazing because they kept doing it that way into 2001. And then you get this guy, Billy Beane, or Brad Pitt, if you like, who said, no, we're actually going to use data on behavior to build our team. And in their case, they're using data on things like your average, how often you hit, how well you field, how well you catch the ball. But fundamentally, it was data about behavior, and everybody thought they were crazy. But if you've seen the movie Moneyball, read the book, actually what happened is they went on a record winning streak, they made the playoffs, and now every single organization in the US, every single baseball team builds their organization in that way. And the question is, could we do the same sort of thing for business? Is there a tool that would let us do that? And I think when you realize that we really haven't been measuring how we're working, we start to understand why a lot of the things we do in companies today suck. Right? One question I'll put up here is, it might seem strange, but it's, why is organizational change hard? And that might seem strange. Things like restructuring, mergers and acquisitions, they're just hard. But think about the problem this way. We fail at M&A, at one company buying another, about 60% of the time. Last year, we destroyed about $1.4 trillion in failed M&A, which is a lot. We've got the same people, year after year, smart people, doing the same thing and consistently failing. And one thing you could say is, well, all right, that's just hard, and I'm fine throwing $1 trillion in the garbage every year. Or you could say, maybe we're looking at the wrong metrics. Because the stuff we tend to look at is we tend to look at the stuff on the left there. I like to look at org charts because I can point to the person at the top and I can say, that's the most important person in the company. It's a lot different if I ask you, who is the social center of your organization? It's very difficult to answer. But luckily, we're carrying around with us devices that can start to objectively measure this. Think about carrying a cell phone. Think about your company ID badge. And now think about, what if we augmented those sensors? What if we created an ID badge that could actually measure not just things like location, but who you talk to, how much you move around, how you speak? And to really think about what we do and what sort of data this could collect, let's actually go through a regular day at work. And for those of you who work in an office, maybe you get into work and you'll have a meeting. Then you'll go to your desk and you'll bang out a few emails, you'll write a report, and then maybe you'll have coffee with a colleague. But importantly, what you're doing is you're not just having those conversations. What you're doing is you're generating data. Now, for example, if we're in a meeting, one important piece of data I'm generating is how much of the time I talk. And this is important. There's actually been decades of research in social science showing that if we want to come up with good ideas or make good decisions, actually we should try to participate in a balanced manner. So the simple question is one person talking 90% of the time? We can measure that. But we don't just have to measure that. We can also look at the dynamics of the conversation. Who talks after who? And the idea that if it's something where you talk and then I talk, you talk and then I talk, you talk and then I talk, then everything is flowing through me. And my opinions are going to color everything that comes out. And as much as I like my opinions, they're not always right. And it's much more important to have this more interactive, dynamic conversation. You can even start to look at things like not just how long I talk, but for each turn I take, how many seconds do I speak for? So right now, for example, I'm speaking continuously for a long period of time. Again, that's good for a presentation, probably not as good for generating ideas. And these are things that we've all experienced. We've all been in a meeting where one person monopolizes the conversation. We've all been in a conversation where someone keeps interrupting you when you try to talk. But you can measure the impact of that. And importantly, even when you're by yourself, you're actually generating a lot of interesting information. Things like I can actually look at your posture and I can start to see how engaged you are in the work that you're doing. So as you get more engaged, you start to lean into your computer, or even if we talk to each other, I can see us get more in sync by our posture mirroring each other. So in real time, I can actually figure out how in sync we are. I can, of course, look at things like activity levels, so how tired do you get, how many steps do you take. We can also look at all the digital data you're generating. So much information is happening digitally today. So much collaboration is happening there. I would actually argue that the value of email is probably greater in that it becomes a social probe of an organization compared to a communication tool. And think about what data is on your Gmail, or is on the Gmail, or company servers in Exchange, for example. I see who communicates with who and when they do that. Okay. All of a sudden, that actually looks at and is measuring how information is flowing across a company. And so you start to have this digital blueprint of what's happening and how are groups connected in a company. And you can also start to combine that with how we actually talk to each other. Not just how long I talk for, but what tone of voice do I use. It turns out I can figure out how stressed you are very accurately by looking at changes in your tone of voice. The way we figured that out is we had thousands of people who were wearing these badges at work. And what we had them do is every 15 minutes, we actually sent them little vials, little glass bottles. Because the way to measure stress, the best way, is to measure cortisol in your saliva. So what we did is we had these people every 15 minutes literally spit into tubes. So we have thousands of these vials of saliva that then we send to a lab. And we were able to show, and 3 weeks later, we were able to show, literally getting our hands dirty here, that we could actually predict how stressed people were in real time, just by looking at changes in tone of voice. Which means that with the thousands of these devices we have out there, I can look in a company, and then in about 2 hours, I know what the most stressed group is in the company. You can look at things not just at tone of voice. I can look at how quickly you speak. I can look at your volume modulation. Do you talk like this, and are you very emotive? Or do you talk like this and use a very flat affect? And so I think it's interesting. So for those of you who are listening through the device and through the translation, even if you're just listening to the sound of my voice, you can sort of get what's going on. And the way I like to talk about these features is imagine watching a foreign film, but turning off the subtitles. So you don't know what people are saying, but you get the sense that this guy doesn't like this guy, these people are having a heated discussion, and that's exactly what we're picking up on. And the reason we come at it from this perspective is that, when I was doing my PhD at MIT, actually we used to be the wearable computing group. And so in the late 90s, we were making these big wearable sensor vests, which had a big battery on the back, which heated up a little bit too much. But over time, these things get smaller and cheaper and faster, and we were able to figure out what sensors you need to understand human behavior. And then we get to something about the size of this, something the size of an ID badge. And all those things I showed before, this can measure. It can also measure who talks to who, where you spend time. And so all of a sudden, I get a millisecond level picture of what's happening in an organization. Now, it's important to tell you when we deploy these things, we do this on an opt-in basis. Companies don't have access to individual data, and we never record what people say. But the results I'm going to show you are actually from real companies where we've been deploying this technology. And I think to maybe start off, a lot of what we're talking about is communication and collaboration and how important that is. But there's also the question of, well, a lot of the work that people do is individual. So should it even matter that we're talking to other people? I mean, how much does that really matter? And so the first company I'll talk about where we've deployed our technology is a big IT firm. Actually, they build IT servers. So they build these big servers for companies that cost millions of dollars. You have people with master's degrees that are configuring these things. But interestingly enough, these people are paid based on their throughput, based on how quickly they can turn around these configurations. This can take anywhere from 5 minutes to 8 hours. But importantly, from the company's servers, I know exactly what people were working on. I know when they were doing it, and because of the badges, I know what they were doing while they were working on a task. And what was interesting is we found that by far the strongest predictor of performance was how you talk to your colleagues. And to get you a sense for why this is important before I show you the actual results, think about what happens if you have a question. So I know when I have a question, I like to go to an expert. I like to talk to a guy like Al over here, right? And I'll ask Al a question, and hopefully I'll get a good answer, and I'll be able to complete my task pretty quickly. But of course, in a company, there's not just one Al, there's multiple Als. And what we did is we saw something very interesting in this company, where when you're working on a task in the 5 minutes to 8 hours it took you to complete this configuration, there was 4 people that everybody talked to at some point. And when you talked to that person, you completed your task in about 1/3 of the time as it normally took you. What's interesting about that, first of all, that's worth, for this company, tens of millions of dollars. This is very significant. At the same time, the individual productivity of those experts were average. Everybody here had the same job title. Okay? This is not that those people are supposed to be the informal experts. That's just the role they took. They took time out of their schedule. They were spending so much time helping their colleagues that they weren't working on their own stuff. But this is good. This is very good, right? I would actually argue that we don't care about individual productivity. I don't care if you spend 8 hours a day helping your colleagues and not actually producing a single report or a single document, that's fine. But if you can make 20 people that you work with 10% more effective, that should be your job. It's just been very hard to measure that. So what this company did with this is, well, they went from me and Al getting the same amount of money to then start to actually look at group incentives and say, if we hit a performance target, then everybody gets a bonus. Also, people like Al now get publicly called out in meetings where you actually say every single day in the morning, who helped you yesterday? And you talk about that. And then these people get promoted, and they're rewarded for that behavior. Because helping each other, working together, that's the whole reason we're in companies. It's not to just work by ourselves. I'm going to show another example here, actually, that's a little bit different. This is in retail banking. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a few network diagrams here. Okay. And I'm going to ask you which branch you think sold the most small business loans. So we've got 3 branches here. Each little dot, just so you know what this data is, each little dot here represents a person. And the lines between them represent how much they talk to each other face to face. Okay? So you see, just to describe it, we've got branch 1 over here where you've got pretty much everybody talking to everybody else. And branch 2 looks a little bit different. You see they're split into 2 factions here. That's sort of interesting. And then you got branch 3. We have this very tight-knit core here, but you have these 3 lonely people on the outside. Maybe they don't shower. I don't know. But so here's a question. So we're going to have a vote. So who thinks that branch 1 had the highest performance? No one. Okay, a few people. Branch 2 and branch 3. Okay, so most people think branch 3, and you're close. It actually turns out that branch 1 had the highest performance. And just to be clear, we actually looked at dozens of these branches. These are representative of what we saw. In a number of branches, so for branch 1, Just to give you a sense, so branch 1 sold about 3 times as many small business loans per person as people in branch 2. Branch 3 was really close, but those 3 people on the outside, those 3 outliers, had really low performance. So the question is, why was this happening? What created these dynamics? These people are trained in the same way. They're paid in the same way. Right? Everything should be the same. But something's different that's actually creating these behaviors. Now what's interesting is if actually you look at branches like branch 1, what managers did is they actually had, so people here, they're paid based on individual performance, based on how many loans they sell. But in branches like branch 1, they had a group goal, and if everybody hit it, everybody got a bonus. So they incentivized people to share. On the other hand, you get branches like branch 2, where we saw this across about 24 branches. And we're wondering, what's going on here? Why aren't people talking to each other? First floor, second floor. Okay. And importantly, we timed it. It took you 10 seconds to walk from the first floor to the second floor. I mean, right there, you can see it. But nobody did it. It was this huge psychological barrier, and we see this time after time in the companies where we go. And it's interesting because they originally had these 2-floor locations to save on real estate cost. But I can tell you exactly how much money that cost this company by having these 2-floor locations. Because if someone on the first floor, who admittedly talks to a very different kind of customer than the employees on the second floor, if they learn something about how to pitch a customer, no one on the other floor is actually going to learn it for a couple of months because you just never talk. In branch 3, what we saw is we saw a number of branches that had these outliers. And in every single case, it turned out that they were new employees. But they'd all been in the branch for more than a month, and they still only talked to their manager. So what happens here is this group gets so tightly connected that it's very hard to integrate new people. So what did they do? Well, they did a few things. One of the things they did is they took what was working here and they rolled it out to everybody else. So that group performance target, they rolled it out to all their branches. I can tell you now they don't look for 2-floor bank branches. But at the same time, what they did is they actually switched someone's desk. For a couple months, they'd take one person from the first floor, and they'd switch their desk with somebody on the second floor. So that you can take the 10 seconds and actually walk, you can physically walk to the other floor and talk to your friends who you already know. But at the same time now, you're going to bump into people who are close to you, who now is going to facilitate more information sharing between these two floors. At the same time, we were trying to figure out what to do with these guys. And what we actually did is we picked their managers, and we gave them about $100 a week, or 100 euros a week, I should say. And we said, take your new employees out to lunch with somebody else. Because I can actually tell you, I can quantify the value of them having one conversation with somebody else at the company. And it's worth actually thousands of euros. So the point is you can make an ROI case about why socialization at work matters. Now, it's not just about opinion, it's about I can prove it. And after they rolled this out, they actually only rolled this out to half of their branches. And they kept the others as a control. And when they rolled it out, actually loan sales went up by 11%. They were flat everywhere else. I mean, this is hundreds of millions of dollars. This is a lot. All by making simple changes, by using the data to show you what was going right and how to change it. The last thing I'm going to talk about is how this data also gives us perspectives on how people work. We have, again, dozens of companies using our technology now. I have data on tens of thousands of people. We have the largest data set on face-to-face interaction in the world. And I don't like using anecdotes to make policy decisions. And so one topic that's interested me recently is the whole topic of gender at work. And so you have people like Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, who says, if women just work differently, then they're going to have the same outcomes as men. And then you get people like Anne-Marie Slaughter, who says, you know what, there's actually just some inherent things in the system that are built against women. And so my simple question was, is that true? First of all, it's well documented. There have been many studies showing that, for example, men and women negotiate differently. But my question is, when it comes to the behaviors, when it comes to how we actually work, are there any differences between women and men? And so I'll pose the question to you guys. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look at data from a number of the companies that we've collected data, where we have approximately an equal number of men and women. I'm going to look at how many people they spoke with. I'm going to look at the kinds of networks they have. I'm going to look at how much they move around, as well as how they talk. And the question, the very simple question, so who thinks that men and women have, this is, by the way, this is all in the US. So who thinks that men and women have different behaviors? Okay. Nope. No. No, they do not. We looked at every single metric. We looked at within companies. We looked between companies, and there was no difference. But of course, we know, first of all, we know there's differences in outcomes between men and women, so what else could explain that? Well, all right, I got an idea. Because men and women are promoted at different rates, so maybe it just turns out that the way, the behaviors that specifically predict promotion and the way they're combined really matter. It turns out there's really two features that matter for promotions. It's the kind of network you have, and it's how energetic you are, right? So if you really, you're very energetic and you talk to lots of different people in the organization, you tend to get promoted a lot faster. Yeah. So, all right, we're going to try this again. So who thinks that men and women differ on this behavior? No one, a couple people took the bait this time. It's still no. It's still no. All right, so we got a problem because I still haven't figured out what's causing the difference. Well, all right, there's one more thing. There's one more thing that women do that I know that men can't do. That's get pregnant, right? My wife is pregnant. This is actually not a picture of her. She wouldn't let me use her picture. So we know that this is a biological thing that men physically can't do unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movies. And we know that there's some inherent issues with this. So first of all, men and women tend to take different time off after they have the kid, which first of all, that's a big egalitarian issue. Like at my company, we give men and women equal time off when you have kids, and you have to take it. But leaving that to the side, we know that that's a difference between men and women. So the question is, what effect does that have? And unfortunately, I only have data from about a dozen women who've been pregnant as well as then had the child. So I don't have something significant enough to look at here. But there's actually a great study out of Stanford where what they did is they created fake resumes for jobs. So actually, the resume itself was exactly the same. What they did is they changed whether the name was a man or a woman's name, and they changed in the cover letter whether they had kids or didn't have kids. And what they did is they sent this to thousands of job openings, and they saw who got invited back to an interview. And what was fascinating was the most desirable candidates were men with kids. And and this works out well for me, I have a son, so that's great. But what you saw is when they actually brought people into a laboratory setting, people said, well, those men, they're responsible. They're going to work hard because they're responsible for their kids. Then the next most desirable candidates were actually statistically identical. It was single men and single women. And then by far the least desirable candidates were women with kids. Because when you ask people, they're like, well, they're going to be thinking about their kids all the time. They're not going to be working hard. And so what this means is that when it comes to the differences between men and women, it fundamentally comes down to bias, right? And that sucks. Because bias is not something that I can change in a year, or 5 years, or even 10 years. This is a societal change that takes generations to modify. This is something that where companies try to think about how we can affect gender balance in the executive class. This isn't just a matter of leadership training for women. This is a matter of, well, listen, what we're going to do is when we make a public announcement, we're going to try to have our women executives be more visible. And we know that that's not going to affect the gender makeup over the next 10 years. But down the line, when people think about who is a leader, they start to think about, they don't think about an old white guy, they think about just a person. And what's also necessary here is changing the language that we use. I mean, and the media that we watch. I mean, my 4-year-old, the shows that are marketed towards him, the vast majority of the main characters are boys. There's more boys than girls. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that if for 21 years of your life, every single day, you're seeing men in leadership roles and powerful roles, and then you come into a company and you're supposed to flip a switch and then change that. We can't do that. I think that the best example of one way to combat this and how to change language is actually the Toys R Us branch in Sweden. They released a new toy catalog where they randomly assigned boys and girls to play with toys. And so you had a girl playing with a Nerf gun and a boy playing with an ironing board. And it's funny because the normal reaction people had is like, well, girls don't play with Nerf guns. And you're like, well, of course they're not going to. If every time they pick one up, you're going to say, well, you don't play with that. And so what I'm saying is that to actually make this change, this requires a sustained commitment on our part. And the idea that just by changing their behavior at work, men and women should expect different outcomes to happen it might help a little bit, but that's not the main problem, and that this is what we have to deal with. And so hopefully I convinced you that we need to use data to look at how we work, and hopefully also convinced you to buy multiple copies of my book. In any case, I really appreciate you guys listening, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben. Again, no network for a lot of people here. So we might take a question here. You don't have to shout it and I'll repeat it anyway. Vous pouvez poser la question en français aussi, je traduirai. So the question for those of you who didn't hear it is, how can you relate this presentation maybe to Henry's and to Jérôme's presentations about trusting people, making people happy? Can you measure them and keep them happy and create a company that's targeted, oriented towards happy employees?
Well, I think there's a few parts to that question. I'd say in the first part, the question about how do you measure things like happiness. Happiness is a very amorphous concept, and when you think about what we already discussed today, it's hard to peg down exactly what that means and exactly all the factors that go into it. I mean, I can tell you I can measure stress, and I can actually give you tools to see what actually makes you stressed. When you talk to your boss, do you get stressed? When you're in this room, do you get stressed? And then we can use that data to help the company see at a high level what's going on across the organization, and then for you to figure out how you should change your behavior. I think the other thing there is, well, if I keep measuring this stuff, does that freak people out and make people, and that's a legitimate question. I mean, importantly with how we deal with this, first of all, if I just came into a company and say, here, everybody, wear this, no one's going to do it. I mean, I wouldn't wear it. We take 4 weeks to roll out this technology, and at the same time, it's opt-in. I mean, we've gotten over 90% participation in every rollout we've done. We even give people fake badges if they don't want to participate, so no one knows they're not wearing the badge. Because we don't give individual data to companies, you actually own your own data. So you get to see your own data and how it relates to outcomes you care about. You get to compare yourself to for example, what does the best salesperson do? How should you change your behavior to be more like that? And at the same time, I think just being very transparent about what you're collecting, what you're not collecting, and really in the consent forms, we show them the database tables of what we collect. And it says in there, we will not share your individual data with your company, and we sign it. And so we've deployed all over the world because I think we're dealing with data in the right way. But it is a challenge. It's something where you could have other companies come into this space and do it the wrong way. And I think any benefit you would get from this technology would be dwarfed by the negative reaction of people.
Une autre question? Il faut faire des grands gestes parce que je ne vous vois pas forcément avec la lumière. Alors, vas-y, allez-y. So the question is, are these tools and data connected to more traditional knowledge management software and networks?
Yeah, so we built our dashboards and everything separate from those systems, although some companies that use our technology have imported it into some other systems. I like to say what we do is it's related but separate from knowledge management in that we don't know what people are talking about, and I don't know what they're saying, but the idea that we're measuring information flow, and so that if you think about traditional knowledge management systems, like no one ever uses them, you have like this great, beautiful system and no one uses it. Actually, the best example of how to maybe use this technology to augment those systems is actually IBM had this project called Small Blue. And what they did is they combined this sort of data, this sort of network data, with information from a traditional knowledge management system. Where then what would happen is when you actually searched for something, so let's say I searched for an expert on Bluetooth, it wouldn't actually just show me like a person who listed Bluetooth a lot on their profile. What it would do is it would actually use my network to search for it. So it would say, do I know somebody who knows about Bluetooth? Or if I don't, do I know somebody who knows somebody about Bluetooth? And then it would show you that path, sort of like what LinkedIn does. And I think that idea of trying to merge these systems, trying to merge the social system as well as the hard knowledge that organizations have is actually quite interesting.
So Ben, what do you want us to leave or to take out of your talk? 2 or 3 ideas?
Sure. So a few things that I'd like you to take out. One thing is that there's a lot of tools at your disposal that you can use to measure how you work. Right? You have Gmail that you can mine your own Gmail. You can do this yourself. You can use Fitbits. You can use other things to actually look at your own data. But at the same time, it's really important to not just look at your data. It's important to relate it to outcomes. So it's nice to see that today I was very active, or today I communicated with a lot of people. It's much more important to say, did I get more done today? Or did I help other people today? And that the idea that we should focus not on ourselves as individuals, but as part of a group that we need to support, and start thinking less about how much I made and more about how much the group made. I think that's something that we all need to think a lot about. So thank you very much.